Hello and welcome to Help for a Hurting World. My name is Ben Collins, and I am here once again to talk to you. And I'm here not alone. I'm here with some of my friends. And Help for a Hurting World has been something that we've been doing over the last number of weeks. And in those last weeks, we've really been covering a number of what you might say challenging topics. We started off with anxiety, and then we talked about loneliness. We've talked about anger. We've talked about a number of different things that people, for the most part, would say, yeah, that's not what I really want to be a part of. And what we're doing now with Help for a Hurting World is we're kind of pivoting in a new direction, and we're moving towards things that we would aspire to have as part of our life in this season. And so I'm part of Grace Central Coast. I'm a campus pastor there, Five Cities campus. But during this unique season, I'm also the spiritual care team lead, and that's why we've been doing these Help for a Hurting World episodes, these live panel discussions, because we're really trying to get to a place where we're meeting the spiritual needs both of our church, other church members, but also the broader community. And so if you've joined us today and you're from the broader community, you wouldn't call yourself a Christian, what you're going to hear today is we're going to be talking about love from a Christian perspective. And we're going to be talking about the call to love and really the power to love in this time when it's really a challenge to do so, because Christians are unique in from like Eastern religion. So when you come to an Eastern religion, you've probably heard of the golden rule, which is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Eastern religions actually twist that a little bit. They change it a little bit and they say, hey, don't do unto others what you wouldn't have them do to you. And so it actually creates a very passive religion where there isn't actually this call to go out and actively love and engage those who are hurting around you. But Christians, on the other hand, are called to go and do things. They're called to move forward, move towards people who are hurting. And they're called to seek out justice and care for the brokenhearted, pr- raise up the vulnerable, and defend those who are weak and suffering. And so what we're going to be talking about are really all of these things that we are aspiring to be, all these things we're aspiring to do in this time. And yet the reality is it's a challenge to do that. And yet, as I think you'll see, that if and when you experience love, which is what we're going to be talking about tonight, in these days when it's harder to find it, it's more beautiful and more striking and pleasing to the eye than when you would normally find it. So when something is found in the midst of adversity, it's even more beautiful. And so hopefully you'll get a sense of that tonight. And we're going to be talking again from a Christian perspective. And hopefully you feel engaged and invited to enjoy that discussion with us. You can submit your questions to this panel by texting that number that's there in the live chat. It's 805-316-1202. And we're going to be having a discussion here for the first number of minutes. But as questions come up, feel free to text them in there. If you text them to that number, they'll come through anonymously and we'll get to them as we're able. So enough of me. Let me let the other panelists kind of introduce themselves. So Mariah, we'll start with you.
Oh, my name is Mariah. So I work for Grace. I'm the kids coordinator at our Five Cities campus. I live in SLO County, and I also have another job elsewhere. I'm a recent Cal Poly graduate, so I'm living here in town with roommates. Moved to the area in 2012, and basically haven't left. There's a short stint, which I did, but overall, I love living here. Love working for the church and just my other connections in this community. So I studied child development at Cal Poly, which is why it feels related to work as the kids coordinator. Yeah, that's mostly me. Excited to be here.
Sweet. Thanks, Mariah. Yeah, and Miles, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Miles Nelson, and I am a campus pastor as well at Grace Central Coast of our North County campus in Atascadero. And I've been living on the Central Coast for a little over 11 years. And my wife, Hannah, and I have four boys, and they're wild and crazy, and we have a good time with them. And we'll probably get to them a little bit later. Uh, but yeah, it's been such a joy to be a part of Grace. It's been our home church since we moved to the Central Coast over 11 years ago, and I've been on staff with the church for around 6 years in various capacities. And so I'm excited to be here tonight and talk with my friends about what it looks like to have Christian love during COVID-19. So, yeah.
Great, great. And then finally we have Becca. So tell us a little about yourself.
Yeah, my name is Becca Phillips. I grew up in Ventura County, moved to SLO for college at Cal Poly, started working for Grace Central Coast like 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago. I'm the missions and choir admin, Pastor Al's admin, but since the COVID situation, a ton of my job has changed, which has been awesome. I graduated May or June, no, March. Graduated in March and from Cal Poly, and I'm engaged and am planning to be married May 23rd, but a lot of that has changed. So we're just in the midst of figuring that out, but it's been fun and I'm excited to be here.
Sweet, sweet. Yeah, well, thanks for joining us. And you'll notice on Help for a Hurting World in the past, we've kind of had like experts in the field, all these people who know a ton about finances and medical doctors. One of the things that we're kind of doing here too is we're just trying to have a little bit more of a informal conversation with more normal people. I mean, Miles and I, we all of us, Mariah and Becca, we all work at the church, but there's nothing super special about us. And yet we're just going to try to share honestly from our lives. And hopefully it's a conversation that you can engage with and enjoy. So let's get us started with just this idea of defining some terms. So what is Christian love from a biblical perspective? What do you guys know about love from the Bible?
Yeah, one thing I'll share is it comes from the book of First John. And this is chapter 4. This is a really common phrase that a lot of people use, whether they grew up in church, have a history with Christianity in some form, or they've just heard it as a phrase that's kind of out there in culture. And the phrase is God is love. We see that a lot in kind of Western society. And but I want to read where that actually comes from in the Bible and then kind of talk just a little bit about that. So this is First John chapter 4, starting in verse 7. And it says, "Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God, and whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. In this, the love of God was made manifest among us, that God sent his only Son into the world so that we might live through him. In this is love, not that we have loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son to be the atoning sacrifice for our sin. Beloved, if God so loved us, we also ought to love one another." Mm-hmm. So, and it goes on from there and continues on that theme of love. But it's interesting that you have that phrase in verse 8, God is love. And that's the phrase that a lot of people like to latch onto. Mm-hmm. And I think what's interesting, and this is true of my own experience and my own thought process as well, is we can begin to redefine what the Bible is actually saying with our own definition of what we think love is or what love looks like. And especially living in a Western society and a progressive society and all of this is, and especially in America, is we hear lots of definitions of what love is from culture and movies and various forms of media. And even as Christians, we can, without really realizing it, our definition of love can start to change. And then we come to phrases like this in the Bible or concepts like this, and then we match it up with what we see happening in the world. And that's when questions start coming into our mind. Like, how could a loving God do this when, we are asking that with a definition of what we think a loving God should be. And so we're really putting ourselves in the position of judging God's motives and character when that's really not a place that we should be putting ourselves in. It's good. And we talked about this at our church on Sunday in Psalm 13. It is good to bring your questions to God, and we should be comfortable and feel safe doing that and know that God wants us to do that. But there does come a point where we do cross a line where we put ourselves as the judge of God's motives and character and heart, when we start to say God is love, and by love I mean my definition of love, not the Bible's definition. And so I think as we talk about what Christian love is or what it looks like, we do have to start with that foundational idea of who God actually is as revealed on the pages of Scripture, in the Bible. And so this is I think, in my opinion, a great place to start to see what is the foundation of love. And it's those things that are described there, that God first loved us, God sent his Son Jesus to die for our sin, that if we don't know God, then we can't really love the way God wants us to love our fellow human beings, and so on. And so I think that's a good foundational place to at least start from.
It's great. It's great. Yeah. Yeah. God's the initiator of love. So understanding what he did is going to be important for understanding what we're called to do. So that's great. It's great. Mariah, Becca, something to add?
Oh, I was just gonna add, I think it's interesting. We see so often like love as a temperamental thing or something that is, as soon as it's not serving me or my needs aren't being met, then it must not be love. And there's this like, I feel like fairly consistent theme in movies or media of like, well, I fell out of love with that person, or I no longer, like I woke up and I just didn't feel that love anymore. And I just think it's so clear in First John, like he says, like, this is love. And then he says, not what you thought it was, which is that you could love God, but he actually like reorders it and says, but that he loved us first. And then he says, like, dear friends, since God loved us, now we can love. So it's kind of redefining this love in the context of Christ's love first, which I just think is so counter to what we're being taught in every platform, that if your needs aren't being met, if you're not feeling it, if your love doesn't feel the same that it did a year ago, 2 years ago, then it must not be love. But that's such like a me focused definition of love. And I just think it's interesting that, thousands of years ago, this could be written and it's still so relevant to what we're experiencing now. It feels like he's talking to our culture right now,
That's good.
Yeah, I think First John comes to mind for me a lot as I think through love. And I think I also think of 1 Corinthians 13 as it defines love. And I think I'm super challenged every time I open the word and read that. How he just walks through like love is patient and love is kind. Like it says, if we do these things, but we don't do them out of love, then there's just no purpose. So I think I often go to that. And I think as I filter my actions and my thoughts through those questions, am what I'm doing or what I'm offering to this person truly patient, truly kind? Does it envy, or is it boastful? It says love is not arrogant or rude or self-seeking. I so often am really challenged by that. So that's like a quick check of my heart of like, what is love? Is it the way that I'm choosing to define it, or the ways that I'm feeling satisfied in this relationship or not? But really using this as my filter of, am I really loving this person if my love does not look like these things? Because it's so just blatantly written out for us. And then another thing that comes to mind is I'm reading through James right now. So this morning I read in James 2, and he talks a lot about not showing favoritism. So that was really challenging for me, and reminded me even of, Ben, you said these words earlier today of like, Christian love is really loving the least of these, and it's really easy to love those that love you. But what does it look like to love those that don't love you, and to love your enemies? And I just saw a lot of overlap of how easily I can show favoritism, or how easy it is for me to love those that are like me, or those that also love me. But that's not our call. That's not Jesus's example of love either. So even in like this morning, I read James 2:8 says, love your neighbor as yourself. You are doing well. Indeed, if you fulfill the royal law prescribed in the scripture, love your neighbor as yourself, you are doing well. If, however, you show favoritism, you commit sin and are convicted by the law of transgressors. And it's just such a harsh like contrast of, that is really where the brunt of what we are called to do and who we are called to be, it does land on love. So this is like obviously a reference to Jesus and his speaking of loving the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and then loving your neighbor as yourself. And so those are some things that I've been challenged by recently as far as love and favoritism.
Yeah, I love that. When you just think about the neighbors that you've had in your life, this is not just about the neighbors that bring you cookies when you bring them cookies.
Mhm.
The neighbors that don't want to have anything to do with you and are loud and annoying or whatever it may be. That's so much of what you're drawing out so helpfully, Mariah, is you don't get to choose who your neighbor is. It's anyone and everyone. And that, one of the passages we were talking about earlier as a little in our discussion was Luke 6, where Jesus says, if you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. Like, there's nothing special, nothing remarkable about loving people who are going to love you back. Patting someone on the back because they're going to pat your back as well. There's nothing uniquely Christian about that, actually. And it says at the bottom of this statement here, but love your enemies, says Jesus, and do good and lend, expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great. Do all these things that are super hard, where you're probably not going to see the fruit or the benefit of it now. But if you do that, your reward will be great. Not that you're earning it, but it's showing who you truly are. And he goes on to explain that. It says, and you will be sons of the Most High. You're going to look like your Father in heaven, the Most High, because he, the Most High, he is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. So a biblical love, a love of God, is love of him loving the ungrateful, me, him loving the evil, me. And if I want my love to look like his love, that's what it looks like, is loving the ungrateful and the evil. Then he summarizes by saying, be merciful, even as your Father is merciful. And so, yeah, that's a super challenging statement. And because it's not just the love that is easier to have. It's loving those who would never love you in return, and that's a real challenge. And Miles, I'm sure you can speak to that as a dad of young kids. I have young kids too, and it's like, man, when do these kids show me that kind of reciprocating love? That's not that often, right? But when it shows up, it's precious. But and if I only loved my kids when I knew that they were going to love me in return, there would not be much love in our house, So, yeah.
I think also, like, with that, this idea of like the self-sacrificial love, I think for a long time I thought, like, okay, my family in my mind I love my family, but when you're living with people, sometimes they're the ones that are hardest to love. And I remember this like thought of like, well, of course I love them, I would die for them. But then someone asked, like, okay, but when your sibling comes in the room, or when your, parent that's bothering you, or your roommates or whatever, like, comes in and they asks for your time or even money, or something as simple as like, a ride to the train station or a ride to the airport. Like, I always joke with my friends about nothing tells you if you love someone more than if you're willing to drive them to the airport at 4 a.m. But like, love as those inconveniences, those like small inconveniences, not just my life, because I have so many people that I feel like easily I could say like, oh, I would die for you because I love you like that. But am I willing to be inconvenienced by you? I think for me shows my heart a lot more, because I realize like how much ownership I feel of the little things. So I feel like, okay, my life is this big thing. I don't own my life. That's the Lord's, but I deserve the money, or I deserve the money I earned, or the time that I made for myself. I think it's just something smaller we feel control over. But then the thought of like, okay, am I willing to love people by giving up the things that even feel like mine? For me, just was really convicting to me as far as my perception of what love is and what self-sacrificial love is. It's sacrificing even the little parts of yourself that you feel like you deserve.
Yeah.
I like how you said those parts that you feel like you deserve.
Yeah. I don't deserve what I feel like I do.
That's really, really good. Anything else you guys want to add to kind of round out this understanding of biblical love? And then I want to next talk about why it's challenging to love in this season. But anybody want to round out this discussion, add anything else?
I think just like echoing what Becca said, I think the understanding of like your actions like is really what it comes down to, because we can talk all day long about how we care about people or about how we love people, I've had like over the years, I've had these sort of epiphany moments about understanding more and more like God as a father as I parent my own kids. I still remember one night when I was putting my kids to bed, and I've said this phrase several times since then, but the first time I said it, it really hit me. But I said to my oldest son, I was like, he's like, oh, I love you, like, good night. And we had just had this really frustrating time of him not listening. And I was like, well, if you love me, then do what I say. And then I was like, oh, shoot. And I was like, words of Jesus, like coming into my head. Like, yeah, bro, like that's you with me. Like, like if you love me, do my commandments is like what I was saying to my children. And it's like, and then I was hearing like God say it to me, of like, yeah, like exactly. I was like, okay. So yeah, it's that like, action accompanying the statement or even like the real feeling that you do have, like, yes, I really love this person. And then Becca, you're thinking like, will you drive me to the airport tomorrow at 4 a.m.? It's like,
Yeah.
I don't love you that much. Like, so yeah, the action accompanying our words or even our actual real feelings towards someone is where that rubber meets the road. And
yeah,
it sounds like that's where we're going next. So
yeah, and that's in John, he talks about that. The author John of First John, he says, "Beloved, let us not love in word and talk, but in deed and truth."
mm-hmm.
So, and the whole basis of that is Jesus didn't just like descend down and hover slightly above the earth and tell people how much he loved them, and then like reascend up to the heaven.
Yeah.
He didn't do that. That's not our example of love. He laid down his life. He came and became a human, a God man, and went to the cross for the ungrateful and the evil,
mm-hmm.
the people like me that don't have that love for God, that have rebelled against him. And I think the last thing that I'll say is, all of this doesn't begin, all of this talk of love doesn't actually begin with God's love for humanity. It actually begins with God's love for himself. So God's love for himself. Jesus talks all the time in his ministry about how he loves the Father and he loves doing what the Father is telling him to do. And it's this idea of the Father, Son, and Spirit. These are the three persons of the Christian Godhead, that they love and delight in one another. And what that means is they love making the others look great and awesome. And the Son actually loves obeying the Father, even when it's really challenging, like going to the cross. And yet he loves and delights in the Father. The Son does so much that he's happy to do what the Father tells him to do, so that the Father would be high and lifted up in his own heart and in the hearts of others. And so really out of that love within Father, Son, and Spirit comes the invitation into that loving community for humanity. And so when we can actually go even further up and into what love is all about by going into God himself. Mm-hmm. And so, but today with COVID-19 and all of these like restrictions and things, we were talking as a spiritual care team that, hey, people aren't feeling as much fear anymore. Now they're feeling more restless and rebellious. There's a lot of like, okay, we're pushing on. Why is all this happening? What's going on? It's a challenging time to love. And so what makes this season of COVID-19 especially challenging to love God and to love others?
Yeah, I think for me, like I think it's easy to make excuses right now.
Super easy.
Yeah, where you're like, well, I mean, I can't, like, I'm not really supposed to do anything, so I'll just do nothing. And that like feels smart, and it feels like you're listening to what you're supposed to do, and which is, in some sense, like, yeah, be smart and listen to the guidelines and like wear a mask when you go to the store and all that stuff. But what's interesting to me is I think, at least I've noticed these thoughts in my own heart. I won't put this on anybody else unfairly that I don't know, but it's like I'm totally willing to go to the store and buy food for my family or go get like ice cream because I want a snack. But then it's like serving people and being out in the community is like, I don't know if that's really like the best idea. It doesn't seem safe to me. And it's like, you just went to the store where there were like 50 people in line all 6 feet apart wearing masks. Like, what's wrong with you? And so I've noticed the excuses in my own heart like start to creep in. Is just like, oh, well, it's just this time. And then once everything goes back to normal, like, of course, I'll go back to loving people the way I'm supposed to. And so it's easy for us to make excuses. And then I also think just being a parent, like, and my wife for sure is experiencing this much more than me with being with our kids all day long, every day. But tensions can run high in the home, and our kids can start to get on our nerves and on each other's nerves. It's a daily occurrence in our house normally, but when they're around each other every second of every day, then it just is heightened. And also on top of that, the frustrations of like not really being able to go too many places, not do the normal things they're used to doing, not see their friends, all that kind of stuff is mixed into it. And I'm sure a lot of parents are experiencing the same thing right now. And so it's just, I feel like my patience has been running more thin than normal. That's affecting my relationships with my kids, my relationship with my wife. Like, it's causing tensions between us when we're talking about the kids. And so it's become, it can be more difficult to love the people who are closest to you relationally and physically right now with this sort of sacrificial, self-giving love when you feel like it's constant all the time. So that's just a real picture of what's going on in my house.
I think it's shown me too, like, and it's interesting, just even in reference to what we were just saying about our definition of love, like how me thinking loving other people is limited to like giving them hugs, being physically in their presence, and like giving gifts, I guess, like, and feeling, yeah, kind of what Miles was saying, like, well, in this time, like, I guess I'm just not able to love people the way that Christ calls us to, due to this. But I know that that's my own, like, putting restrictions on what I believe love to be. And I know, like, the head knowledge that it's the most loving thing you can do is to pray for someone or to trust the Lord with their circumstance or with their situation. And like, my prayer life hasn't been where I would want it to be, during this time. So like, I know that there are so many ways to love the Lord that he's made possible for us despite, whatever it is. I mean, Paul was in prison for so much of his ministry, and he was like, I would say he was very actively loving his brothers and sisters in Christ, but he wasn't giving them hugs, being able to be in their homes or have them in his home. So I think that's challenging to me, of like my own restrictions I've put on how I can love other people. But I think that it is hard because the things that maybe I'm more inclined to do or are more natural for me are not possible. But I know that I've also been lazy in seeking scripture and like coming before the Lord, asking for wisdom of like, okay, Lord, how can I love people better? And then I think for the Lord, like, it's been hard to, I think so much of love is trust. And I think it's hard to trust that the Lord, like, big picture sees all this, or even trust that he's so big picture that he doesn't see me in all of this. And that is a lack of love for the Lord. But I just think, just the situation has made it hard to see the big picture of what the Lord's doing for me in my life, or seeing other people who are really suffering during this time and just being like, okay, God, like, where are you in this? How am I supposed to love you and not know what's my next day is going to look like, but love through trust? So I think that's like for me, the relational person to person love, but then also kind of how this has been difficult for me to love the Lord through this as well.
Yeah, that's good.
I think something that comes to mind is when it all first started, it felt hard to extend love. I think especially because my go-to was like, what does this alter about my norm? What does this change for me? What things can I do or should I not do because of all of this? So it felt like a lot of my thought life was about me, my life, my routine, what's impacted, to the point where it felt like I could easily like walk by one of my roommates and not even ask them, like, how is this impacting you? Like, have you heard from your job? Or if you're in school, how is this, like, have you heard from that professor about that class? How are you going to do that online now? So it felt like my own energy and time and capacity and thinking through that was like the quickest thing for me to reel back of like, maybe I'll talk to them tomorrow when I have more capacity. But I had to check that and acknowledge like, yeah, this does shift a lot for me, and those are important things I need to think through and talk through with people and pray through. But it doesn't mean that I should take away that like open ear and open heart to my roommates or the other people in my life, to just like call someone and say like, yeah, how is this impacting you, and what has shifted, what's been stressful, what hasn't been. So that was one of the first things that I noticed. Like it was so easy for me to pull that back and be like, kind of go into a self-preservation mode of, yeah, I got to figure out my own stuff right now, and then I'm super excited to love on you tomorrow or next week when I have my stuff figured out. So yeah, that was one of the first things that came to mind for me. Just choosing to like confide in and then ask them how they're doing and really be willing to listen, and maybe that was reciprocated with a like follow up from them of, yeah, and how is this impacting you, and maybe it wasn't, but yeah, I think the concept of kind of self-denial and self-sacrificial love in the sense of time and energy and even thought life, for my roommates and then other friends and stuff. So yeah, that was challenging for me initially.
Hmm. Yeah, I think, Mariah, even that verse you shared from 1 Corinthians 13 is love is not self-seeking. And, I think that's was so my response initially is self-preservation. I'm self-seeking. I'm thinking about my people, my family, how to keep them all safe. And I'm saying like, hey, we need these things, and not thinking about others, not thinking about being last in line, but first in line. And that's just totally, totally true. And I think another thing that's been challenging, especially as we get to this place, is I think, again, 1 Corinthians 13, love is patient. And I think it's hard to be patient right now. I think as this has drawn on and on, I think it's been even more challenging to love in a way that's faithful. I think it's easy to love, like, I think a camp experience is a great, a great example. Like I used to work with junior hires and go to camp and stuff for a week. And yeah, a lot of people would say I would never do that. And there's good reasons to say that. But generally speaking, you go, away to the woods with some kids or something for a week. That's a great time. But like if you're like, hey, we're gonna go to camp for 8 weeks. That is like that fun, that buzz, that high of having all that new. Now it becomes mayhem, and so I think that's one of the real challenges is how do you love over a long period of time? How do you love when you've been cooped up with the same people for this amount of time? Mm-hmm. And I think that's been one of the challenges for me too. And so with that, I think let's talk about some examples of love that you guys have seen personally and experienced, either with love for God or love for others. And hopefully this is a little bit of some good news, just like ways that you've seen love happening in this rare time where it's harder than normal for love to flourish. And so what are some stories for you personally and around you where you've seen love happen?
I think God's Storehouse, our ministry at Grace Central Coast, for those that need food, has been like a huge testament to me. I'm the admin assistant that records all the numbers each week, so I get to actually see like how many volunteers we have, how many people were served, how many people we had driving and running food to different people that weren't able to make it. And like I know the numbers each week, and then I come in, our first week of COVID-19 isolation with God's Storehouse, and our volunteer list has like tripled. We have way more people volunteering and showing up to drive or to shop for people or whatever that I hadn't seen ever before. So that was like encouraging for me. And I mean, we're such people of trends. Like I see that and then I'm like, I need to get in on that and like join in on this because like this looks awesome, So I think that like was really encouraging to my heart to see so many people that thought like, okay, well, my Saturday mornings don't feel the same that they used to. I don't need as much rest as I used to because every day, you know, I'm sleeping in or I'm doing whatever. A lot of college students are feeling that way, I know. So I just saw this like, all right, well then Saturday morning I can give up because, and I want to give up because this is a ministry where I can love and a way that I can show like my desire to be involved, which I just think is really cool. I've felt so much the love of the Lord during this time and like patience from Christ in my own like wrestling and figuring out things with how I feel about, you know, my wedding or, you know, living situations or financial, you know, concerns or thoughts or graduation or whatever, all these things. And I just have found like every time coming before the Lord, that he's met me with peace and like restoring my soul, which I don't deserve that. But I've really experienced the love of the Lord in the way that he has been so faithful to like meet me in my wandering and meet me in my in my lack of peace with himself. And he's been giving me and providing that peace and that assurance that what he desires will happen, and that will be good and it will be better than any plan I could have come up with on my own. So yeah, two ways that I've been seeing it, I guess.
Yeah, just as I was saying, it's a big challenge for us to be faithful in our love. It's not a challenge for God to be faithful in his love for us. And I'm so glad that you've experienced that, Becca. That's awesome. It's really sweet. Miles, Mariah, anything?
Yeah, some things come to mind. One of my friends, right at the beginning of this, like the first wind of staying at home, she super quickly was like, they're going to get low on masks. We need to be making masks. And I was like, you're being wild. Like, it's fine. But then sure enough, weeks later, now everyone's like making masks. So she's like, gotten all of this fabric and just has been faithfully making masks and doing like a pattern that's even really hard for her. I know nothing about sewing, so I don't know, but it's just been encouraging to see like she's messed up on many and gotten frustrated and had to throw some away and start over, but I've just seen her like faithfulness and commitment to make masks and donate them to people and places that need them. So that's something that I was encouraged by. And I love that you said like you don't bake cookies for the neighbor that always bakes you cookies, because I have another friend who got on the trend of like making bread in this time, like we all have. And he was thinking through like, I want to make bread for a neighbor. And he decided to pray and ask God, like, who would you have me make bread for? And he lives pretty close to Cal Poly. So there's like one house in particular that he lives by that is just like chock full of partiers, always loud, like parking is tight over there. They're always parking in their spots, like just a challenging neighbor, kind of like he said the word annoying, you know, like you mentioned, Ben, like just the one that comes to mind. And so he felt pretty challenged by the Lord to actually make the bread for them. So yeah, those are just things that I'm seeing in small ways that I'm like, yeah, that's such an easy thing. And he could have so easily chosen the neighbor that I'm sure he's had sweet interactions with and waved hello and even knows their name or knows their kids. But yeah, he chose to seek after the one that has been a little bit more challenging for him. So those are some small things I've been encouraged by. I think in my personal time with the Lord, I felt also a lot of that comfort and peace. I think I keep resting and coming back to the concept of his provision and that he provides. And I've seen him do that in years past in my life. But even when I hadn't and didn't have years of experience of seeing the Lord provide, I've just seen, yeah, he's so gentle and patient with us, to just repeat that over and over again, like he truly does. So yeah, that's something I've been encouraged by recently, is just when I try to pick up the pieces on my own, it kind of comes together like I was never planning on. But it's consistently his provision, not my own provision. So I've been encouraged by that over this time.
Great. That's great. So just to clarify, he did make the bread?
Yeah,
Or-
he made the
okay.
bread. Yeah.
Just wanted to
Yeah,
make
so
sure.
he felt, yeah, sorry that wasn't clear. So he felt like the Lord asked him to make the bread for them. He did. He actually delivered it to them, and then when they returned the like thing that the bread was in, they had made him an apple crisp. So he was like, "This is crazy." He said now they've been like chatting a little bit. So it's really a story of
Nice.
redemption. Yeah.
Oh, sweet apple crisp. Let's go.
There you go.
You know,
I know.
now I want apple crisp. Thanks, Mariah.
Yeah.
Well, Miles, maybe don't make an excuse, and you can make some for us. That'd be great.
Yeah. Wow. I really love you guys.
Yeah. Good luck.
Yeah, let's do.
Oh man. Yeah, I've got a couple as well. One is with North County, and there's a local homeless shelter up here called Echo Shelter, and you may or may not be familiar with it, but yeah, it's like a real staple in the North County community for caring and serving homeless people, and something that happened really early on with COVID-19. The week of all of the safer at home, shelter in place stuff, the majority of their volunteer base was in the at-risk category. So almost overnight, they lost, I'd say probably 80% of their volunteer base. And, we're talking about people who need to stay overnight as chaperones, people who need to do check-ins for dinner, serve dinner, things like that. So it's a really essential service for the homeless friends in our community. And so we were able to connect with them, and a number of people in our church have been able to go there and serve in various capacities. My wife serves there regularly once a week anyway, but has been going a little bit more often during this time. There's been some college students from the SLO campus at our church who, like Becca mentioned earlier, like, hey, I have a lot of time on my hands. I want, I'm not at risk. I'm young, I'm healthy. How can I serve? And so we've had some of them make the drive up to Atascadero to serve, even as overnight chaperones, and stay the night, which has been really cool. So it's been really neat for me to see the family of at least those that I know in Grace Central Coast, and I know there are others in the Atascadero community who have really stepped up and are serving the homeless in our community in this time. And it can be very easy to say, like, oh, that doesn't seem safe, I'm gonna stay home. But they're just like everybody else, they're taking all the right measures to keep things safe, and they're going the extra mile to protect. And so to see people just saying like, hey, like, yeah, maybe it's a risk, but this is a service that needs to be provided, and I'm feeling good about this decision, I'm going to go and do this. And so that's been really uplifting to me to see that, and our community stepping up in that way. Another one is just a young mom in our church family who over the last several months has just shared some stories with me of a challenging neighbor situation where there's some young kids and a single parent, and the parent has to work, and and so when school was happening, wasn't that big of a deal because the kids were at school, parent was at work. Now, as you can imagine, things are a little different where the parent is at work and the kids are at home most of the time by themselves. And so early on, I was talking with her about this, and early on in COVID-19, she was kind of more taking the position of, I'm going to protect my family and not let my kids interact with the neighbor kids, because we need to distance 6 feet, all that stuff, and I really just want to make sure my family's safe. And then as the weeks went by, she had this growing concern for these kids, and just came to a place where she really felt like God was putting on her heart to reach out to this parent, these neighbor kids, and say like, sure, maybe the safer thing for my kids would be to not let this interaction happen, but the safer thing for these other children would actually be to let them come and be at our house and to do their schoolwork over here and to eat lunch with our family and things like that. And so it was really sweet to be able to hear that story and know that that's a way that somebody is interacting and processing Christian love in light of COVID-19. Like, I could just shut all the doors until the governor says everything's fine, or I could find places and ways where I can go actively serve people who are in need, even if there is a risk to myself, even if it costs me in some degree. That seems like the greater call that I'm seeing from Scripture, to have that sacrificial, self-giving love in service to somebody else. And that was just a really big encouragement to me. And yeah, I think something that we can all think about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. I had a couple, and the first is there was a family that I'm aware of that was out and about. I think it was the Saturday before Easter, and they came back, and one of their kind of good family friends with kids had kind of snuck into their backyard and set up a whole Easter egg hunt for their family, and then like left. And so they came back, and it was like, guess what? We set up an Easter egg hunt for you guys in your backyard, and just totally out of nowhere, out of the blue, whatever. And I just thought that was so fun, and what a great idea to kind of sneak in, find out that they're out of the house, and then go over there and set that all up. And I know the kids just had a blast. And Easter egg hunts are just so much fun for those kids, and this family has 4 of those kids, and so they all enjoyed it in a big way. and but another thing is, I think so many of the acts of love that I've come into contact with have been really in homes with young kids, or something like that, where moms and dads are just fighting to be faithful, and just fighting to be in a place where they're loving their kids in the midst of this time when they're having to do school, and they can't have sitters over, and there's no date nights, and they're up at all hours of the night, and it's all these. And I just want to say that there are so many acts of love right now that are going on that aren't going to be some big huge story, but they're done in a corner, they're done in a house, they're a moment of kindness, a moment of patience, a moment of perspective, and yet those are of such great value too. And they're truly beautiful things when they happen. And so for all those parents with kids out there who are both parents working at home, we're doing all this homeschooling, and knowing that school's not going back in session, and all of those different things, those acts of love, those are so significant. And as your kids, as they watch how you respond to this season of trial, that is going to be such a message of hope to them, such a message of hey, there's something bigger than this trial in this world that we can lean on as a family. And so cheers to all of you who are loving behind closed doors in this season, because that is really, really challenging. It's been a huge challenge for us, and yet God's been faithful, and we just can't give up. There's always more rope. God's going to give you more rope, and you'll make it. So keep looking to him. And that's where I wanted to turn the conversation at the end here of our time, is talking about the power to love, the power that makes this kind of love possible, because there's a big difference between knowing what you should do and having the ability to do it. And so secular humanists would say, hey, if everyone just has the right education, if everyone's been told and indoctrinated with this is what is going to be best for the world, then everyone's going to do it because they know that it's the best. And a secular humanist, his name is Langdon Gilkey. So this guy Gilkey, he lived in the 1940s, and he totally believed that if we just educate the world, if we tell them hey, look, this is what the experts have said, this is going to bring about the best society, so let's all just teach everybody these things, and society will walk in line. We'll do this together. And he was in China when China was overtaken by Japan in the 1940s. And he was put in this camp with thousands of people in a very small area, terrible sanitation, and you had about 6 square feet of your personal space. That's a very small bench that you could sleep on, and that was it. And he was in this compound with thousands of other people, and there were, priests and missionaries and all these different people, all in this, and people like him, journalists and scholars, all in this compound, under in in China there. And the name of the compound is Shantung Compound, and he wrote a book about this. And so he said, when I started in there, I thought everything was going to be great. I thought, you know what? We are all rational human beings. We're gonna work together. We're gonna get this figured out. And he said that was a good theory for the first 2 months. And then after those first 2 months had passed, now think about how long we've been in this thing, COVID-19. After those first 2 months have passed, then people started to steal. They started to be super self-protective. What was once like, oh yes, we're clearly going to do this, and we're all good, upstanding, caring for other people kind of citizens, all of that started to deteriorate. And one of the clearest examples of this was there was a very small room where I think it was like a 10 by 10 foot room, and there were 9 people living in one, and then same size room, there were 11 people living in the other. And so Gilkey goes up to them and says, sirs, it's clear that someone from the room with 11 should move over here so that it's equal, 10 in each room. And they like threatened him and kicked him out and pushed him out of the door and said, if you come back, you're gonna, we're basically gonna beat you up. We're gonna maul you. And that was when he was like, man, my worldview, his secular humanist worldview was really starting to deteriorate. And in that camp, in that compound, he ran into someone that you may have heard of from the Chariots of Fire. And his name is Eric Liddell. And he was this great Scotsman, he was this incredible runner and Olympic gold medalist and all this. But he also went and was sharing the good news of Jesus Christ with the people in China. And he was put in this camp as well. And Gilkey started to see Eric Liddell and just the way that he treated those around him. And so instead of him instead of what everybody else was doing, which is like grabbing their food and keeping it for themselves, he would actually portion off a little bit of food and make it for the young kids there in the compound and celebrate their birthdays and have parties for them and give of himself and all of these different things. And he saw this man as a picture of what religion was really supposed to be. And then he saw all these other religious people who were even worse than most people because all of their selfishness had this kind of sanctimony to it. Oh, because I'm this and this religious person, then I certainly deserve this more than you do. But Liddell was so different, and it really intrigued Gilkey to the point where he really came to see that maybe there actually is a hope for true society, for true love, and for others that can come out of religion if religion actually leads you to encounter the living God. And so this guy who was a secular humanist going into this incredible hardship came out of it saying, man, if religion is just a bunch of rules, it's sunk. It's just another kind of secular humanism. It's just another way of being educated. But when it really comes down to it, there's wickedness in the heart of man. But if that heart of man has come into contact with the living God, then if that's what religion is, then there's actually hope for transformation, because he saw it in the face and in the life of Eric Liddell, who actually died from a brain tumor there in that compound. And everyone was in shock because the one bright light in that whole compound, according to Gilkey, just was taken away in a moment. And so with all of that, like, that is what is different about Christianity, is that there's a power to love that Christians have that is not just something where we have this great education. We haven't just been told how to live, but there's actually a power behind it. So let's talk about that power behind it as we kind of wrap up our conversation tonight. So can you guys just describe what is it that gives Christians the ability to love their enemies and to love and trust God when times are really tough?
Yeah, I think just hearing you talk about that, it's so interesting, because I think, and I've recently been thinking about this concept with the idea of peace as well, that we ask Christ for peace, or we ask the Lord for peace, or we ask the Lord for love for our enemies, or Christ. But scripture actually says that God is love. So like, we ask him to give us love as if it's this other thing that God can bring into our lives. But I've been kind of reworking in my own mind, like, what does that mean when I ask God for love when he calls himself love? Essentially, I'm saying, like, Lord, I need more of you. And so I think, and that has been huge for me with peace, because Christ is like prophesied in the Old Testament, and it says Christ is going to come and he will be their peace. And so I was thinking about that, like, okay, so when I ask Christ for peace, I'm saying, Lord, like, I need you. I need more of you. Christ, I need the life that you lived to be what's flowing out from me. And I think that that was a helpful like switch in my mind of, okay, so like, how can I love? Well, I could ask the Lord for love, or I could just ask that because Christ is in me and because I'm a believer, that more of Christ would show and less of me would show, because as more of Christ is being shown, then more of love is being shown, because Christ is love.
Yep.
It's weird. I think it's just like an equation in my mind in that sense of, well, you know, if this equals this, then that's what needs to be shown. But it's so beautiful, and that people that I see, believers that are loving me well or loving the people around them well, are just living for Christ, and love is flowing from them because Christ is love and God is love. And in that sense, it's not this like action of, all right, now I'm putting on love and now I'm going to go do love. It's like, I'm going to live for Christ. And this is what naturally comes from loving Christ and living for him, is that his characteristics, not our own because we're sinful, but like the characteristics of God are flowing from us and coming from us in a way that's unique and different from a person who doesn't have Christ, because that love is not going to look the same, because they're not showing Christ, who is love. Does that make sense?
Yep. It's good.
Yeah.
Miles, Mariah?
Yeah, something that I think of a lot is my understanding of the depth of God's love for us is more and more grasped each day as I just understand my own sinful heart and my own broken nature. So as I think like the greater understanding I have of my brokenness and my failures leads me to understand that, wow, like, and even that, like, God sent his son to die on a cross for me. His love covers all of that. And so as that cluster of sins grows and grows and grows in my understanding of it, his love for me does as well. So yeah, I think what gives me the power to love as a Christian comes from my understanding of God's love, and that continues to grow each day. I think the first time that I really believed that and became a Christian and decided to follow that, it was such a small, like, I think my understanding was like, yeah, I think sometimes I mess up, but it's been sweet to see, again, like the Lord's provision and his love just continually provide for that sin as I've grown to understand it more and more. I think another thing I go back to a lot is that the Lord loves us so much and sends us out to love. He also delights in us is something I really resonate with. Like, we have the freedom to delight in the people around us, to delight in our neighbors, simply because God delights in us and he takes the time to know those little things about us. So yeah, I think while love can send me out in this like big rampage of like, okay, I'll go love everyone and, you know, serve at God's storehouse every Saturday of the year, because that's some big feat. Like, I can also just, remember and rest and really like find like a small connection of like, oh yes, and he also delights in me. So like, I can delight in my neighbor as I walk by them and have a nice conversation, or I don't know. So I think delighting goes along with loving for me a lot.
That's good. It's good. Miles?
I think just the idea that like we love because God first loved us. So in 1 John 4, again, it's verse 19, and it's just that short little phrase, we love because he first loved us. And understanding that our love for people, this goes back to what you were saying earlier, Ben, like the sort of like the wooden rule is a way to think about it. Like don't do anything for other people that they aren't willing to do for you, sort of thing. Or like, do something for someone else if you know that they're going to give it back to you in return. But it's the doing things for other people when you know full well that you're not going to get anything back. And maybe you will, but like, you shouldn't expect it. And be willing to love people who you know that's never going to happen, which was related to our parenting stuff. But yeah, but that idea of like we don't, as human beings, really have the ability to continually love people in that way until we really understand that we are truly loved by the one who created us, and until we understand that we were first loved by God and then empowered to then go out and love other people. Like, if it were not for the love of God, if it were not for the cross of Christ, if it were not for the resurrection of Jesus, then we maybe be able to do it for a little bit, but like this ongoing sacrificial, self-giving, loving and getting nothing in return, excuse me, after a while, like that would just start to grate on us as people, and we would finally just say, you know what, this doesn't work for me. I'm not getting what I want out of this relationship, so I'm done. But when we know that the love of Christ compels us to just keep going and keep going, no matter how hard it is, and we can always think back to Christ loved me first when I didn't deserve it, so I'm going to go love this person even though maybe they don't deserve it, and maybe they really don't. But if we're trying to live like Jesus lived in the way that God really wants us to, we'll continue to love those people even when it's hard, because God loves us even when it's hard.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah, that's good. Those are all such great words. Thank you for just like answering that question so well. And one of the things I didn't say at the top end, kind of intentionally, was that we're going to be walking through a whole list of ways in which we aspire to live, and yet they are called actually the fruit of the Spirit. And so tonight we talked about love, and next week we're going to be talking about love. The next one on the list is joy. And yet the fact that they're called the fruit of the Spirit means that it's not just Ben Collins and who I am, from all on my own that's able to do this. It's actually the Spirit of God that has come into me. The same Spirit that dwelt in Jesus himself is here inside me, giving me the affections for God, the desire to do these things that are actually going to be pleasing to God. So it's the fact that the Spirit is in me. That's so much of the power that comes to love. And all of you guys are talking around that too, but it's just to kind of give you a little bit of a heads up of where we're going to be going, and also to say that's ultimately the power, is the power that, it's an otherworldly presence within us that allows us to live in this otherworldly sort of way as Christians. And we just freely admit this is beyond our ability to do on our own. And that is why God gets all the credit for the love that we are able to show. And so I want to just thank you for tuning in to this episode of Help for a Hurting World. We've changed up things a little bit, moving in this new direction. And also Sunday evenings, we've now actually moved our kind of time to a post Sunday morning service time where you can pray and connect with us. So if you want to ask some questions and do that live on a Zoom meeting, you can actually join us after our Sunday morning service, which is around 10:30 a.m. when things finish up. You can go online to our website and find the Zoom link, and you can talk to people like you see on this call right now who will be there to pray and connect with you. So we've kind of taken our Sunday evenings and put it into that Sunday kind of late morning slot, and we're going to continue to do these Help for a Hurting World times on Tuesday evenings. So once a week going forward. So next Tuesday, we'll be talking about joy as well. So thanks again for Mariah and Miles and Becca for joining me tonight. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks.
Yeah, it was awesome. Thanks.
All right, and hey, please share these videos, this channel, with whoever you may think would benefit from it. It's our pleasure to be able to provide this, and we hope that it really is helpful. So we'll see you again soon.